section, and this will also be available through the DEC. So now to turn it over, we'll start with Ross.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Share my screen here. Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Ross Hassinger. I'm the city forester here in Buffalo. I'm also a certified arborist. So today I'm going to be presenting on variables of street tree selection for municipalities. As many of you know, it's challenging to get trees to grow in an urban environment, subject to several different stressors and potential conflicts. So today I want to touch on my experiences when trying to come up with the right tree for the right place. So we'll be reviewing 6 different factors to look at when selecting street trees: climate, salt tolerance, tree architecture, urban space constraints, pH, and species diversity. My slides today will focus on trees and factors to consider when planting street trees primarily. Also, the tree species will be focused on, my experience with tree selection here in Western New York. Folks joining us from Long Island or other parts of the state may have other climates and factors influencing their tree selection, but a lot of the overall topics covered will still apply. So Buffalo falls under the USDA plant hardiness zone of 6A, which means our average annual minimum winter temperature is -10 to -5 degrees Fahrenheit. This is important when determining which trees will survive and thrive in your region. So it looks like Region 1 in Long Island is Zone 7A or 7B. So we share a lot of the same street tree species that are suitable for urban plantings. Buffalo gets some strong wind events due to how we're situated off of Lake Erie. Our average wind speed is 11.8 miles per hour, which makes it one of the top 10 windiest US cities. It's not uncommon to get a couple of significant storm events from late October into January with wind gusts over 50 miles per hour. In larger events like this, we can get 100 or so tree failures, ranging from large limbs blocking roads to complete tree uproots. Buffalo's climate brings significant snowfall and occasional ice storms, which can damage trees. Proper selection of tree species that have growth habits better suited to your region's weather is really crucial. Heavy wet snow that accumulates in late fall or early winter when trees may still be in leaf can cause snow loads that do real damage to the tree canopy. Ice storms can be even more devastating depending on the thickness of ice that can really weigh down the tree limbs. The Buffalo region had a mid-October surprise snowstorm in 2006 that dumped like 3 feet of snow with many trees still in leaf. This resulted in approximately 30,000 trees lost. It was pretty bad. Reforestation efforts since then have more than replaced that quantity of trees lost, but we're still working at achieving prior canopy coverage goals. With ice storms, luckily I've never gone through a major ice storm here, but have spoken with several colleagues throughout the state that have, and it can cause a lot of damage to the urban tree canopy as well. So another factor to consider when planting street trees is de-icing salts. The volume of salt used by our streets department is relatively high. They go through approximately 20,000 tons of salt a year in order to treat 1,600 lane miles of road. Where trees are near these streets, damage can come by way of airborne salt spray, killing dormant buds and resulting in the telltale witch's brooms, and also by salt accumulation in the soil where it breaks down and negatively affects the tree with water uptake and results in leaf scorch. So in my experience, trees planted adjacent to main arterial travel lanes or along roadways with higher rates of speed often do not survive due to salt spray. Trees along these exposed higher speed roads really need a buffer zone in the form of parking lanes, bike lanes, or planting them set back from the roadway where larger growing spaces may exist. So your choice of tree species when salt exposure may be higher is very important. These trees listed here are pretty tolerant to urban conditions, including road salts. Honey locust, London plane tree, red oak. We've used them in higher exposure areas and have not noted much mortality. Another factor to consider when choosing street trees is the tree's architecture or growth patterns. Here I've got some images of Bradford pear, which has invasive properties, narrow branch angles that may contain included bark, brittle wood, more prone to breakage, and late leaf drop. It seems like these trees are just always busting apart. We really don't plant them anymore. So you can choose tree species that have branching patterns with wide angles, that have evenly spaced branches, more able to support heavy loads from snow, wind, and ice. Kentucky coffee tree, ginkgo, and hackberry tend to have good branching patterns, and we've had good success with these. I try to avoid planting faster growing tree species that can develop wood that is brittle and will break apart easily under stress from winds, snow, or ice. They're also generally messy trees, which shed lots of twigs and small branches throughout the year. Silver maple, black locust, horse chestnut, all may be suitable for larger open green spaces without as many targets or maintenance requirements, but not well suited for more urban settings. So I touched on, trees that hold on to their leaves a little bit later. Where wet or heavy snow can occur, try to limit the planting of trees which hold on to their leaves late, such as Bradford pear or Norway maple. Trees that hold on to leaves late into the fall also have a bigger surface area, making them more prone to damage from strong wind gusts. So limited space constraints in an urban environment is another thing to consider when planting. Smaller tree pits in downtown and business districts, narrow tree lawns or hill strips, and other utilities need to be considered prior to planting. Smaller sidewalk cutouts in downtown business districts should have smaller varieties of trees selected. In some newer streetscape projects, we've used structural soil underneath the sidewalk to really increase soil volume And we can then select larger varieties of shade trees to try to maximize the canopy coverage. So planting spaces with narrow tree lawns or the space between the sidewalk and the curb of less than, say, 4 feet should really only be planted with ornamental varieties to avoid damage to the adjacent hardscape and to the tree itself. Large shade trees planted in limited grow spaces can buckle sidewalks. And as these trees grow larger, their root plates are confined and more susceptible to uproot, especially after sidewalk repairs may sever the structural roots. So the photo on the left shows a mature silver maple, which has erupted the sidewalk panels. A similar grow space is shown on the right, has a columnar variety of Sargent cherry planted, which should not cause the same amount of infrastructure conflicts. So yeah, do not plant tall shade trees underneath, excuse me, underneath power lines. Use low grow or wire friendly trees to avoid repeated pruning, which can be challenging. Some utility companies may offer cities incentives and will work with you to plant approved trees under power lines. This is really a win-win because the municipality gets reimbursed for some of the tree planting costs, and the utility does not need to spend a repeated budget on pruning. It's best to plant upright varieties of trees near building fronts, and if planting spaces are along, let's say, bus routes or roads that permit larger tractor trailers, use upright varieties of trees to avoid damage to tree limbs. So this diagram shows do not plant areas and minimum distances required for planting near stop signs, near stop signs, driveways, light poles, fire hydrants, and water and gas valves. We use this as a reference and provide it to landscape consultants when developing a planting plan on larger capital improvement projects. We have hundreds of trees that, for whatever reason, were planted in these conflict spots years ago and have grown now to a point of requiring repeated pruning or infrastructure repair that really stresses the already limited maintenance budget many municipalities deal with. So looking at tree choices to solve the problem of urban space constraints, we can use trees such as Washington hawthorn, different varieties of crabapple, and Osage orange as just a few. The white shield Osage orange is a relatively new tree we've planted in the past few years. We've used it in limited numbers to see how it does. I'm excited to have a new tree species like this to use, and overall it's shown good success, growing to a height of 35 feet and similar spread. This cultivar is a fruitless and thornless tree, making it more usable in urban environments. In addition to de-icing salts contaminating tree planting soils, trees that are planted in concrete cutouts in sidewalks are also subject to higher pH, soil pH conditions due to the gradual accumulation of concrete dust and alkaline runoff. Ginkgo, some of the hybrid elms, and tree lilac have shown tolerance to higher pH soils. So it's important to diversify the urban forest. We want to avoid monocultures subject to tree loss from introduced pests and diseases. Most of us are familiar with the 10-20-30 rule of tree planting. Plant no more than 10% of a given species, 20% of a genus, and 30% in any given family. While this general rule has served urban foresters well, research has been presented that it should be improved on to focus more on the genus level and to say 5% to limit the impacts to larger exotic threats. Buffalo has 2 genus that are overrepresented. Maple at about 39%, and linden 18%. We no longer plant these trees in larger quantities to avoid catastrophic losses of trees from a species or genus-specific insect or disease, such as emerald ash borer. So we post our approved street tree list on our city website under the Bureau of Forestry page. This list comprises trees of different sizes, forms, and characteristics. All of them perform well in urban environments if sited properly. We list 34 shade trees and 11 ornamental trees. This list is pretty comprehensive and covers many different planting scenarios, but there are other species or cultivars that could be considered. We just don't want a list that's pages and pages long. So I just thought this photo was funny and wanted to add it as we're almost done here, and I'm going to shift gears a little bit and move to different ways our street trees get planted. So basically, we get trees planted in 3 different ways, either by residents calling our 311 line and requesting a street tree, and we contract this out with a licensed landscaper. Also by volunteer groups is another way. The volunteer groups get funded to plant bare root trees in their neighborhood, or by larger capital improvement projects where, you know, streets get dug up, new pipes, new streetlights, new signs, and new trees. So the City of Buffalo's policy for street tree planting requests is based on available funds, which determines the quantity of trees we can plant, but also on how many requests we get. We have approximately 40,000 suitable vacant tree planting sites throughout the city, but we only get about 200 or so requests for trees each year. We found that where people request a tree, it usually survives. So with our city forestry budget, we plant by requests and hire licensed landscape contractors to plant trees. We plant about 200 trees each fall season. These are 2 to 3 inch caliper, balled and burlap. We have good success rates and low mortality when people request the tree and help with watering and basic care through the establishment period. With our volunteer tree plantings, we've been fortunate enough to have a number of tree-friendly neighbors who have gotten together to share their time and passion to help reforest our urban tree canopy. I work with them to find suitable locations and species to plant. This work has been funded by some local nonprofits who see the value in tree-lined streets. There's been thousands of bare root trees planted by volunteer groups in the last 15 years after the 2006 fall snowstorm in neighborhoods all over the city. Tree mortality rates are a little bit higher with volunteer plantings as compared to our contractor plantings, about 50% mortality rate, mostly due to deep planting, covering the root flare, or trees getting planted in front of properties where owners didn't necessarily request them and they don't get watered throughout the growing season. But nevertheless, we still have many new trees growing healthy today because of their hard work. So a big part of my job is to work closely with our city engineers, consulting on larger capital improvement projects regarding street trees. This is a good way to learn from past mistakes and recommend not only the tree species, but design of tree planting areas so that they perform better. So just a few take-home points. It's challenging to get trees to grow in urban environments. As I mentioned, trees are up against a lot of different stressors. Things like climate, salt, and wind can and will cause damage. Poor structure or size and architecture of the trees can limit the viability. And it really just comes down to the right tree for the right place. So with that, I'll open it up to any questions you may have, and I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Ross. We do have quite a few questions in the chat, but if you could actually just pull your last slide up for just another minute. There were some people who might benefit from reaching out to you directly with some specific questions.
Sure.
But I will just skim through these questions real quick. We'll spend try not more than 10 minutes on these questions here. But someone had asked, how large is Buffalo's tree inventory?
We have approximately 70,000 street trees. That does not include city-owned vacant lots where there's a number of non-planted trees. And it does not include all of our park trees, but yeah, about 70,000 street trees.
We have had quite a few questions about salt tolerance. So one question in particular, have you developed a list of trees for heavy amounts of salt application?
I listed a few, but I've referenced the Cornell, Dr. Nina Basik's list of trees that have shown relative resistance to salt. And out of those trees, I've chosen the ones that really have applications as street trees. And I've listed those on our city website under our approved street tree list.
So for trees that are not specifically salt tolerant, how far away from a roadside would you recommend planting them to avoid that concern? And if there's any other tips for mitigating that problem that you could share?
Well, as I mentioned, salt damage can come in a number of different ways. Salt spray, can travel quite a bit and do damage to dormant buds. If the trees are near roads that are salted and high-speed roads, you probably want them set back, 15 or 20 feet at least to avoid that. Or also, trees in areas where sidewalks are constantly shoveled and people use de-icing salts. You just don't want to plant them there because that salt will accumulate in the soil. You want to choose species that are really more salt tolerant.
Do you have any reference for how long that salt typically remains in the soil? or when it could be considered safe to plant a tree species that is not salt tolerant?
I don't have any of that data. You know, urban soils are tough. We often deal with, at least in our region, very heavy clay soils, different contaminants, salt being one of them. And how long that remains in the soil, I can't really say. I would imagine some of it can get washed out, but yeah, I wouldn't have all that information.
All right, and we've had a few questions here asking about some comparisons between native versus non-native trees, and if utilizing native trees have resolved any of these issues that you've described, or if there is any benefit or to using native trees or reducing the amount of ornamental trees in an area.
Well, I always try to plant as many native tree species as I can. But, we are limited. At a minimum, we don't want to plant trees that have invasive properties. We have planted trees that are not native, mainly because they perform well in our urban environments. But the list of just choosing native species alone won't really get us there to diversify our urban canopy. We want to look at trees that will provide environmental benefits, but as I mentioned, at a minimum, won't wreak havoc and kind of get loose and create problems. So using natives has a number of good benefits, but it's tough to use them exclusively.
Excellent. And for anyone that is interested, Christina did put a link in the chat to the buffalo tree inventory and their approved species list. And Nina Bassick did include in the chat that after the spring thaw and rains, the salt typically washes through the soil profile, causing less damage to the surface roots, but good drainage is key. We have had a couple questions about planting the trees along the streets and sidewalks, and typically the soil compaction and impact it has on the sidewalks. So there was one question asking specifically about structural soils underneath the sidewalks. Have you noticed if there's any concrete settlement due to lower compaction of the base materials under the concrete? And let's see if we can tie that last question in there also. You can go ahead and, or this one here, about aeration or tips to increase filtration. Those two questions sort of link together.
Yeah. So, the case study with, structural soils and the concrete settling over time, I really don't have the long-term data to observe that. I mean, as I mentioned, we have used those growing systems on a few newer projects, and I'll be monitoring to see how the tree's development goes, and then also, how the infrastructure holds up to that. So yeah, it'll be good to see. I'd like to use it more often. It really comes down to available funding, though. It's looks very promising. I know it's been around for some time.
All right, and as one last question here, do the nurseries you use provide a diverse enough selection of species, and have they added trees on your list that they didn't used to carry?
We source our trees pretty local. We try to source the trees from nurseries within like 100-mile radius. We're fortunate enough to have a couple of good growers here. They have a wide selection, but like a lot of municipalities, we're at the mercy of what's commercially available. Different species, different size. We have our city specs of that 2 to 3 inch caliper bald and burlap trees that are grown as street trees. They're trained their growth habit. So sometimes there can be limited stock. And I'd like to see a few different species, but that's part of conversations with the growers and to see what what the demand is out there. I like to think that the city of Buffalo and the areas around here, we order enough and have enough, provide the demand. But it's always good to try new species like we are with Osage Orange in limited numbers. But yeah, the selection here is pretty good.
All right, Ross, thank you very much for all the information you've provided us with today. I think I sped read through all the questions here and summarized them. But for anyone that has any specific questions for Ross or about the city forestry program in the city of Buffalo, Ross does have his email address linked up on the screen there. You guys are welcome to reach out to him directly. You can also send us an email at nassau@cornell.edu, and we could try to provide you with some resources or connect you back with any of the panelists with any of your questions. So Ross, thank you again.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, everyone.
All right, so our next panelist for today is going to be Christian Guernelli, and he is coming to us from here today from the town of Huntington here on Long Island. So a little bit more local.
Okay, so you have my screen, right?
Yes, I can see the screen here. If any of your attendees could say if they could. I believe they can though.
Okay, so hello everyone, my name is Christian Guernelli. I'm an environmental planner for the town of Huntington. I've been with the town for about 13 years, and the last 10 or so years been involved with urban forestry, park planting, and grants program. My background is environmental studies and then also park and resource management. So the current version of our urban forestry, park planting and grants program, the groundwork for that was laid by the town's comprehensive plan. That was the Horizons 2020 comprehensive plan that was adopted in 2008. In that plan, it called for a green Huntington tree management and planting program. So goals of that were to reestablish Huntington as a tree city under the Tree City USA program, and then also to update and extend the town's inventory of trees to all properties owned and managed by the town. Previously, the town had street tree inventory done. Wasn't really up to date, but they didn't have anything at that point for the parks. So that goal of becoming a tree city, that kind of helped to renew the town's planting program within the parks. The town had previously been a tree city for about 15 years, but hadn't renewed that designation in somewhere around 10 years or a little longer. So in 2011, we started to reestablish ourselves as a tree city with a small Arbor Day planting at a town park. We also held an educational program for students related to tree benefits. That was actually a picture from that program. You can see the students there. And each successive Arbor Day since, we've had small to major planting at a town park, somewhere between 10 and 100 trees. And then we've also included educational programs for children at each of those, whether it's tree benefits or tree health. We did the Tree City part that the comprehensive plan called for. Then in 2012, we went for our inventory. So we received a New York State Urban and Community Forestry grant for partial funding for that tree inventory. So this grant program, it's for tree inventories, tree planting, forestry management plans, tree maintenance, education. And this one that we received was for our inventory grant. So the goal of our tree inventory grant, this was to record the DBH, location, species, health, crown width of all landscape trees in the town's 60 active parks. So we defined landscape trees as trees that were, for the most part, intentionally planted. And then you see there below, it's just a map of the town of Huntington, and all the green there, those are our parks. So pretty widespread area. And once that inventory was completed, it involved somewhere over 3,100 landscape trees that were inventoried. So as part of that grant application, we also included what we call the planting location evaluation. So we took the information from that inventory, where trees were located. We went out to parks for site visits. We used aerials, and this helped us to determine appropriate planting locations for trees. So once we were done with that, for our 60 active parks, we had what we call the planting location evaluation. So it was basically planting layout for each of the 60 active parks. So it's not quite to the level of detail of a landscape plan, but it provides like an outline and the basis for that. So this is just a more zoomed in version of that planting location evaluation. This one is for Breezy Park in Huntington Station. So that 2011 first Arbor Day that we did was actually in this courtyard. I think you can see my cursor there, courtyard at this park. So the planting location evaluation, this is the legend that we included on all of them. So we had single trees, whether that's a specimen tree in a park or maybe a parking lot island, something along those lines. We had groupings of flowering trees, alleys, buffer, entrance plantings, shade tree plantings or street tree plantings. And on the planting location evaluation, we also included the green dots, which were trees that were part of that inventory. So we were aware of their locations in the park. And then also these red dots here, these were trees that, as a result of the inventory, were determined to potentially need to be replaced. So obviously important when we're out trying to finalize a landscape plan, we know what trees may also have to come out. So we had our planting location evaluations done for each of the parks. And then each 10 years since then, we've used those planting location evaluations to do a park planting at least one a year, usually around Arbor Day, but sometimes additional. So I just want to get into a couple of grants that we received that helped to fund those park plantings. So in 2018, we received New York State Urban Community Forestry grant for tree planting. So the first urban community forestry grant we had was for that inventory. This one was for a tree planting. This was for Manor Field Park in Huntington Station. This is in an environmental justice area. It's on East 5th Street in Huntington Station. It has a multi-use turf field, softball fields, basketball courts, soccer fields, tennis courts, playground, basically anything you would expect in a moderately sized park, active park. So just a little about the area surrounding the park. To the north here, this checkered area is the train tracks. There's an industrial area here. To the west is pretty dense, but single family residential. To the south is commercial, mostly office. And then to the east here, it's a multifamily dense development. It's actually a transit-oriented development. So they allowed them additional density because they're within a certain distance of the train station, which is just off my screen here to the west. The reason I mention that is this development, they have a pathway. It doesn't show on this map. You'll see it in a few slides later on, but they come through the park. There's a walkway through the park and then onto East 3rd here. And that's how they would access the train station if they're walking to the park. So that actually ended up affecting our landscape plan. So this park is about 15 acres. And then prior to our planting here, there were 14 trees, and they were mostly here up on East 5th Street and then some along our entrance as well. But if you're out in the park on a hot summer day, basically felt like a desert. There wasn't really anything out there. So we thought it was a great opportunity to improve the environment of the park. So this is our planting location evaluation that we had for this park. how we've done our designs for our parks over the last 10 years or so. We'll take our planting location evaluation, we go out to the park, and we'll take a look and evaluate, has anything changed at the park since we completed the planting location evaluation that may call for more trees or additional areas? Were any trees removed? In the case of this park, I mentioned the multifamily development to the east. You can see to the east here, to the right side of our screen, it wasn't there when we did the planting location evaluation. So it ended up, and you'll see on a later slide, a walkway coming through the park, through this whole area and out onto the street to the west here. So that provided additional planting area along that walkway. We also want to look at what has changed at the park that maybe we can't plant it in places that we thought we could. In the case of this park, we had a building here to the east, the right side of our slide, where at the time we did the planting location evaluation, it was an abandoned building formerly owned by the state. But by the time we were going to do the planting, the town had plans, and that was in 2018, to do a community center here. So we had proposed originally major street trees along this East Fifth Street frontage here. No sidewalks, no overhead wires, so we could do some pretty significant large trees in that area. But as part of this community center, they were planning entrance in this area, parking area here. So we didn't want to plant here and then down the road have to remove the trees or damage the trees. So we decided not to include these in our planting. One other thing we'll also look at is, can we think of anything kind of unique maybe to add just another layer of interest to the planting overall? And we did that for this park, and in a few slides, I will get into a little more detail on that. So, excuse me, this is our landscape plan that we came up with for this park. We ended up with planting 84 trees in addition to those 14. So we ended up with about 100 trees in the park. So really great improvement. And this one, you can clearly see this multifamily development that I mentioned a couple of times. I just want to do a zoomed in version of this landscape plan. So we ended up with 19 different species of trees, about 70% native. We try to keep at least that minimum percentage. We'd like to increase it a bit, but not always possible. So just some of the plantings we did here. The bottom of our screen on East Fifth Street, we had some street tree plantings. We did some parking lot plantings as well. This is the walkway that I mentioned. So you see to the right of the screen, this multifamily development. There's a walkway coming through this the entire park and coming over here. So we included trees along that walkway. We would have preferred to have trees go the entire walkway, but there's a soccer field use here that gets pretty close to that walkway. So it wouldn't really have functioned well if we ended up putting trees here. So we included them along this part and then along the exit onto our street to the west here. We also included trees along the edge of the park in this area. To the north here, there was a bit of an open area kind of looking through into this industrial property to the north. So we included an evergreen buffer in this area, a couple kind of staggered alleys between the fields. And this rear area, it was kind of, before we did the planting, kind of like a no man's land. No one really goes out there. It's train tracks and kind of high tension wires, but we wanted to add some sort of visual interest, even if it's from a distance. So we did a few tulip trees out there. So they'll be really upright, really tall, grow pretty quickly. And then also we did some bald cypress, so more of a triangular kind of shape. They'll lose their needles in the fall, but they'll both get pretty large. So then from a distance, we have that kind of interest there, but it also is a buffer. So you're not looking straight into the train tracks and the high tension lines there. So I had mentioned we sometimes will try to come up with something just a little different, a little interesting with our plantings. So for this park, still at Manor Field, we thought of a sensory walk area. So that's consisting of trees of varying textures, smells, and colors. So that area is actually along this walkway here. So we have the row of trees here along the walkway, and then also we had a second row here. So in the sensory walk area, we included trees like white pine. You can see to the bottom right of our screen. We included cherry, also magnolia. We had some river birch, swamp white oak, so some interesting bark textures as well. And we also created a sensory guide. So it explains, what you are going to experience in the area, what you're going to see there, the species that are there. And it was geared towards elementary age students. So we posted that on the town's website. So that's another resource available to add another layer of interest to the planting, but also experience to be had in the park. As part of this planting and grant, we also held our 2019 Arbor Day program at the park. So we had local Girl Scouts come out. There's a troop right from Huntington Station from the area. So they're regularly using the park. We had them help plant a handful of trees in our sensory walk area. We also did a tree benefits program for them and also proper tree planting techniques. So prior to them actually planting the trees, we showed them exactly what you'd be trying to do to help ensure the success and long life of that tree. We also had a second event as part of this grant and planting for National Public Lands Day in 2019. So we had our same Girl Scout troop come out, and this time they helped us measure the canopy width of the trees that were planted. So this was September 2019. We also had them measure the trunk diameter using a caliper and then give an idea of relative tree health or any specific issues with the tree. So this gives them that kind of hands-on experience, but also we take all that data, that information, and we put it into our tree inventory for the park and into our GIS program. And the goal is annually each year, hopefully with scouts or just students or members of the public, we go out, we'll record that information, then keep adding each year to our inventory for that park. So they're local students, local scouts, so it really gets them invested as well. They're going there annually, they're seeing how the park is changing and evolving, and really it gets them to kind of buy in and really appreciate the park that much more. So one other planting grant I just wanted to talk about is more recent. This was a New York State Urban Forestry Council grant. This was for current Tree City USA members. We did this one for tree planting at Columbia Street Park in Huntington Station. So this wasn't quite as significant of a planting, but still I think really valuable for this particular property. There weren't any landscape trees really here. There was one red cedar kind of scraggly up front. Probably wasn't planted, probably kind of planted itself there, but you can see our planting location evaluation here. We called for some street trees and then some trees in the area of the playground, and then potentially a nice specimen tree off to the side here. So for this planting, this is our planting plan. I'll get a Zoom version in another slide, but we approach this a bit differently than the one for Manor Field. So this park, it's a neighborhood park. So there's people, it's the immediate area. They're the people using the park. Whereas Manor Field is more of a regional park, so it's people coming from all over. So we felt for this park, community input, really local focused community input was really important prior to our planting. Whereas Manor Field, community input's always important, but this one we really wanted to focus on that community immediately surrounding the park. So we involved park stewards who live in the immediate neighborhood. They're the park stewards for the park, and then also a local community group to get their input. And what they told us, they said, this field here is used really regularly as a pickup soccer field. You can kind of see that wear pattern in the center here. So we don't want to plant any trees that would impede into the use of that field. They also mentioned concerns for visibility into the park. So we didn't want to, come in with an evergreen buffer along the front of the park here and block their visibility into the park. So we ended up with deciduous trees along the street here. They're 30 feet on center, so there's not going to be any issue with visibility into the park. This is the zoomed version of that landscape plan. So the street trees were honey locust, American elm, London plane, and American linden. We also included a specimen, just London plane, kind of on its own. It's actually a little further down in our picture here. This is a picnic area, this kind of light concrete area to the left of our screen. So we planted in the vicinity of that. Could potentially provide shade once it's larger, but really the thinking was more just to add to while you're there having a picnic, just something nice to look at. We also down here in this area included a copper beech. So this is a really, can't tell from this aerial, but really nice open area, really great room for that copper beech to expand. Definitely will provide visual interest from anywhere in the park, from the playground. Eventually, once it's really large, nice place potentially to sit under. So that's what we had for this area. So we planted these trees in December of 2020. We completed the planting. We hope to hold a dedication in the spring. We don't know at this point what that's going to look like. We're going to do something. We'd like to have the community physically there and present, but we'll have to see how things go. We're also in the spring going to be installing drip irrigation here up front. There was already water in the park, drip irrigation. The cost was really reasonable, so we thought for the future of these trees, it would be a great idea to install that drip irrigation. So that's what we did. So most of what I've been talking about are kind of traditional grants, or what we talk about as traditional grants. The request for proposal comes out, you figure out a project, submit your application. If you are awarded the grant, you complete your project, and then you request your reimbursement. We've also been part of some non-traditional kind of grant programs. So one that's been a pretty good one to be involved with is National Wildlife Federation Trees for Wildlife program. So since 2014, we've applied for these native bare root tree saplings. Some of the species we've received, redbud, white pine, red cedar, red oak, white oak, red maple, sugar maple, river birch, a whole diversity of species native to the region. And what we've done is done a tree giveaway each year at our town's Earth Day event. The two photos, the top left and the bottom right, that's from our Earth Day event. So we give trees away to residents at that event. When they get the tree, they sign a pledge basically saying they'll care for the tree. We give them tree planting instructions, tree care instructions. We'll also often with each resident kind of discuss appropriate planting locations on their property. Are they looking for a smaller tree? Do they have a shaded area? Is it a large open area? Is there a lot of sun? Is it wet? What's the situation on their unique property? We also have done on Arbor Day, we've had students plant these bare root saplings, and then we've also given them away to students on Arbor Day. So you can see the bottom left screen here is just a couple of girls with the tree that they were given, that bare root sapling, and then they go plant it on their properties at home. The program just requires that you either do a giveaway, a planting, or a combination thereof. So we've done a little bit of both over the years. Since we've started this one in 2014, we've given away or planted just over 1,100 bare root saplings. And one other just more recent kind of non-traditional kind of grant is the New York State DEC Trees for Tributaries Buffer in a Bag program. So as long as you have a property that is within a certain distance of a body of water, you can apply for this. And this one you receive 30 kind of mixed shrubs and trees. They're bare root saplings again. They're native species. With this one, we got eastern red cedar, we had bayberry and beach plum, all appropriate for the beach kind of habitat location that we selected. We used the cedars off to the left of our screen, which would be the west. There's a kind of a large residential structure that was put up there. Not the greatest view from the beach area. So we put what will end up hopefully becoming a nice kind of evergreen buffer there. We use the cedars. And then up in this area where you see us digging and planting, we removed some invasives that were there and put the shrubs in that location. So they'll do well there, hopefully, as well. So our current version of our urban forestry planting program basically started with a plan, that 2008 comprehensive plan that called for us to reestablish Tree City, which we did in 2011 and have done for the past 10 years. The last 7 years, we received that Tree City USA Growth Award. It also called for that inventory, which we completed in 2012. And that was partially funded by that first urban community forestry grant. As part of that, we did that planting location evaluation, which set us up with those planting layouts for our 60 active parks. As a result of this, through grants and through also other funding, we've planted hundreds of trees in the town, in parks since that time. We've also distributed and planted over 1,000 native bare root saplings. And also really an important part of it, provided educational programs with an emphasis on tree benefits for hundreds of students from the town, and also taught them proper planting techniques at that time as well. This picture here was at that Breezy Park. That's where we had our 2011 Arbor Day that I started with. This was, I think, 2017 Arbor Day. We had another group of students come down, and this is when we completed what was shown on that planting location evaluation. So we completed our planting for this park with the help of these local students whose school is within a quarter mile of this park. So just before I finish, I just wanted to mention the town's environmental open space program. So we have an ESPA committee. They make recommendations to the town board related to funding. They've made recommendations related to providing match funding for grants, providing outright funding for plantings. So without them, we really wouldn't be nearly as successful as a program as we've had over the last 10 years or so. So we're very grateful to them, and then also to the town board for providing the funding for the different projects that we've worked on. So that's all for me. I'd be happy to answer any questions anyone has.
All right, Christian, thank you very much. Once again, I'm just going to skim through the questions and try to sum them up because, we do have some people that are asking similar topics. So someone had put in the chat, and Christine had already answered it, about how does one go about getting a grant for its town and its trees. So Christina had linked some of the resources from the DEC for some of the various grants that you had referred to, but maybe you could speak a little bit about, from your perspective, of the individual who was applying for that grant. What was that process like, and how did you guys get started with that?
Okay, so yeah, pretty regularly those urban community forestry grants come out almost annually, maybe not quite annually, but the request for proposals will be posted probably on the DEC website. We get emails because we're on the email list, but we know when they're coming. The DEC will also offer, prior to you applying, they'll go through that application with you, usually in a group. I know on Long Island, we've done that a couple times and been part of that. And they'll go through the request for proposals, very specific, every single thing they're looking for. And how we've dealt with that is we, as I mentioned, have all these different planting location evaluations. So we have all the different parks and we see what fits that request for proposal best. So they want to see, let's say it's a tree planting grant. They want to see where is it located? Is it going to be a significant benefit? The tree planting grants, I don't know if there's a match required at this point. There was when we did it back in 2018. Can you provide that match? Are there partnerships? We have our ESPA committee that I mentioned. We work with other groups within the town, so they always want to see partnerships. Is the planting going to be sustainable? Are you going to get a really high survival rate? I think at this point they're looking for 95% survival. Something that's helpful for our proposals, we have a warranty. So we have, after that first year at least, we can, if anything doesn't survive, replant. So we have that. as well. So I would say just pay really close attention to the details of what they're requesting. And in your grant, be really detailed and to the point. You don't need extra of anything too much, just really focused, detailed, have a clear idea of your project. I think that would help.
Excellent. And one thing I might add, just from my experience, is that not always do these grants specifically call for tree planting programs. Sometimes you can get a little bit creative in your application. If you're looking to establish a village green space or a water infrastructure project, you could utilize urban trees as part of that project. One person had pointed out that not all of our attendees here today are necessarily municipal staff. So could you speak a little bit about how the town of Huntington engages some of its community members in the planning of these projects? And maybe what are some other ways that community members and residents can get involved in their local tree program?
So what we've done, depending on where the planting is, we reach out to, if there's a local community group, like we've done a bunch in Huntington Station. So there's a couple of organized community groups there, and we have contact with them. So we'll reach out directly to them. So if you're in a local kind of group in your town, even if you don't work for a municipality, you can get it that way. We have a Chamber of Commerce who we've dealt with on a couple of these. We have a conservation board who's volunteer members. We have volunteer park stewards for all of our parks. So we always reach out to them if we're doing a planting in their park or in the area that they're located. We're always happy to have volunteers, especially with plantings. So we publicize these because as part of the grant, they want to see that it's publicized. So it'll be on the town's websites. You can always look wherever you live. Hopefully they also publicize. We invite anyone from the community, not just like Girl Scouts or students, to come down. So community members, we would be happy to have them at all of our events. So whether it's the town's Facebook or the town's website, there's always publicized out there. So hopefully other areas are doing the same. And then you can always, I mean, if someone called and was interested and wanted to join us, they could join us for the tree giveaways. They can join us for all the planting. So, I mean, we're pretty accessible. I would imagine other towns are also similar in that way.
Excellent. If anyone has the urge to go plant some trees, definitely reach out to us and we'll connect you to some of those individuals and groups that are looking to conduct tree planting programs because volunteers are always in need. One person had asked, your plan for Huntington is very inspiring. Have you ever done presentations or any other type of collaborations with other towns or villages to share some of these ideas or work on any regional plans together?
So we did a presentation at, it was 2 rounds ago, I think, of the Urban Community Forestry grant. So they invited all the local towns, municipalities, any groups that would be able to apply for that grant and asked us to present specifically on that 2018 grant I mentioned for the Manor Field Park planting. So they asked us to present and show how we went through our whole project to the other towns. So we kind of showed our process to them in that way. We haven't directly reached out to other towns, but you know, we're happy to help. We want as many trees planted everywhere, and it would be great to work with surrounding towns and other places also.
In addition to some of the public grants that you guys have applied for, have you ever worked with local businesses or larger corporations to sponsor some of these planting events?
So one that I was not all that directly involved with, the town worked with PSE&G. So PSE&G does these large volunteer days where they come out and do big plantings and things. So the town has worked with them. I wasn't involved with that. Other than that, not so much corporations, at least in my area that I've been working with.
All right. Someone who had asked about your tree inventory, was this done by a professional or did you have volunteers involved with that?
So we hired a consultant to do our inventory. So it was done mostly by the consultant and then a little back and forth with us going out and checking things, but primarily it was done by the consultant.
All right. And now for some technical questions.
Sure.
You had mentioned a little bit about your watering program for your public trees.
Mhm.
Could you maybe elaborate on that a little bit more? And if you have any estimate for what your mortality rate for some of your newly planted trees are?
So we kind of learned this one over time. So we now will, for the most part, as long as it's feasible, install irrigation with our projects. Like the most recent one I mentioned, the 2020, we're going to be putting drip irrigation. A lot of these active parks, there already is irrigation just for the field areas. So we'll kind of come off that with irrigation for the trees. Our more recent projects, we've had a better success rate because we've learned without the irrigation, we planted in some tougher areas early on. We planted species we thought would do well, and then we ended up losing some or greater percentages than we would be happy with. So now we're at least 90% with our more recent ones, probably higher. And then with that warranty that we get, that only increases it. Because if anything dies within the first year, we get that warranty, they're replaced, and then maybe we lose 1 or 2 out of 100 kind of thing, because we have the irrigation. We have a general services staff who goes out and maintains these things, who they also have a certified arborist on staff as well. So pretty high success rate at this point.
Excellent. So you had described a few projects where you guys went into these existing locations and parks and facilities and have planted trees. Now, what happens when things are a little bit different, where you have these established trees, whether it's along a roadway, in a public park, or along a parking lot, and you want to expand on other projects? So if you have your street trees and you want to expand your street or expand your parking lot or engage in some other type of infrastructure project, how does your town approach that situation?
So, I mean, it really depends. If it's a street tree kind of situation, then we have our highway department. They have their arborist who deals with that. They're almost kind of separate from us in that way. In terms of parks, if there's additional infrastructure, happens pretty often. So there have been new parks over the last couple of years that have come in. So those are just unique plans, and you can plan around everything, and that's pretty straightforward. The park I mentioned, Manor Field, there's new playground going in, new splash park going in. So we always, when we're doing our plantings, we have to figure out and deal with our engineering department or whoever may be designing that future improvement. Where are those going to go? And then we'll hold off on landscaping that area until such time as that's completed. Otherwise, we don't want to go in and have to remove things or damage things. So that's mostly how we'll deal with that.
All right. Now, Ross had given a little bit of his experience with planting native trees. Do you have any different type of experience with incorporating native trees into the town of Huntington plans? Or why
so
may or may not be more beneficial than an ornamental tree?
Yeah, I mean, we over the years have definitely gone more to the side of native trees, just based on their variety of benefits. Huge, obviously, ecological benefits. We're trying to stick at least 70% with our plantings and then go up from there. As Ross mentioned, 100%, not really feasible, I don't think. For us, I mean, we're going into parks, so some are street trees that we're planting, so we have to be a bit concerned about impacts there. When we're within parks, we're not quite as limited in terms of what we can plant, but we are definitely pushing towards natives. We've found availability isn't always great through our contract. We have over the years improved our list to remove any invasive species. We also talked about pears. We used to have pears on our planting list, got rid of that a few years ago, and then keep including more and more natives. Over time, hopefully the availability will be better, because there's decent availability, but there's a ton of different species that we would like to plant that we can't necessarily get on a regular basis.
Excellent. And we have one more question here. How are you adjusting your your tree choice for climate change? USDA has a climate prediction report regarding trees. Have you changed your species choice because of this?
For species, we haven't changed it much at this point. There are some more kind of southern species that we would allow to be planted, like maybe I don't have anything offhand, but so but we haven't really taken too many off. Like I've read some things, maybe sugar maple would be not really surviving here. We don't plant a ton of those anyway. I think a lot of what we plant currently will be okay, at least for, years to come. But we haven't revised our list that much related to climate change at this point.
All right, and I think that is all of the questions that we have here. If anyone does have any additional questions for Christian, I don't see he has any contact information on there, but you can definitely reach out to us and we can refer your questions to him. And before everyone starts logging off, I just want to add that if you will be requesting ISA CEU credits for your attendance today, you can just put your full name and your ISA certification number into the chat. Someone had put into the chat here regarding your response on the native trees. Have you ever put in any specific requests to your nursery growers or some of your other planning committees to advocate for native trees specifically?
Not necessarily to nursery growers, but another part of what I'm involved with is subdivision site plan review. We review landscaping as part of that. So we're pushing in that way too. So any developers, builders, homeowners, we're also asking for natives in that way. And then when we do our own town plantings, we're asking for natives in that way as well. The town board has updated its list to add way more natives and remove some non-natives and then any invasives. So the town board is on board, kind of helping ask for more native species as well. So we're approaching it from a bunch of different ways. And over time, I mean, on these approved plans, they're having to plant a native species. So hopefully that will affect, that affects what they're asking the landscape and the growers for. So that should change, what's available and hopefully over time increase the diversity there.
Excellent. And there was one earlier question in here that we might have skimmed over. Could you speak a little bit about your annual budget for trees, or maybe about some of the methods that you use to try to justify these expenses for trees in your annual budget?
So we have a requirements contract and it's really reasonable. So even some of our larger plantings, we're having the cost isn't all that extravagant. So let's say for that Manor Field planting I talked about I think it was in the 20-ish thousand range, not including irrigation. So it ended up being a little more. So as I mentioned, also we have that ESPA committee who makes recommendations to the town board. So I think everyone involved really sees the benefits and the costs when you're comparing it to major kind of infrastructure improvements. If you're planting trees, you could plant 100 trees for maybe 20 grand. If you want to put a new turf field, you're talking $1 million or more. So the trees really, for what you're getting, the cost really isn't so significant. And it's a good kind of field project, I think, for everyone and a really good benefit and good kind of bang for your buck.
All right, excellent. And we had a couple of people asking if you would be willing to share your contact information.
Yeah, sure. I have no problem with that.
All right. If you'd just like to put that in the chat for people.
Oh, sure.
Email or the best way to respond to you.
Sure.
And that seems to be it for all of our questions. Ross or anyone else, if you have anything else to add, we are nearing the end of our webinar today.
I think I'm good. Thank you again, everyone. If anyone has any additional questions, my contact information was there. Feel free to reach out to me. I'd be happy to discuss.
Excellent. And anyone that's interested in getting involved in our Long Island ReLeaf Committee, definitely reach out. We're always looking to recruit new members. If you would like, to have your local city or town represented in any of these tree planting projects, we'd be interested in getting more involved with you all. So thank you all for attending. Once again, any information about ReLeaf or the DEC Forestry program, or any of the activities that we have going on here in Region 1, definitely feel free to reach out. Once again, I'll put my email address in the chat there. It is mf628@cornell.edu, or you can also reach out to us at nassau@cornell.edu.